Revelations 12. And going through this book, you always have to keep in mind to who it was written to. It was written to saints that were being persecuted. What was the purpose of the book? Well, the purpose of the book was to encourage these saints through understanding that God is in control. And we get to chapter 12 and we start to see some visions. And I believe that these kind of visions are ones that people get nervous about when they read. So let's just get into it. Revelations 12. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon, with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, who was to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, and where she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. Now war arose in heaven. Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they love not their lives even unto death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. When the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given the 2 wings of the great eagle, so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness, to the place where she is to be nourished for a time and times and half a time. The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman to sweep her away with a flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth. Then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And he stood on the sand of the sea. This is the vision that starts to introduce the end of the book, moving into a new phase. And the first thing that describes is this woman. And we could know who this woman is because Revelations is counting on us to have read our whole Bible. And there's a story that describes something like this woman in the book of Genesis. A prophet who was a boy at the time gave a prophecy that symbolized something like this woman, and his brothers didn't want to hear it. Remember who the prophet was? Joseph, right? Joseph gave a prophecy of an image similar to this. So this woman represents Israel or the people of God. And this dragon is described. We'll get into this, but the dragon is described as waiting to devour this child. Now, what does that depict? Well, it depicts 2 things. The first one is Herod. Remember that when Jesus was born, Herod wanted to kill him right away? And then he killed all the children that were 2 years old or under. So the first symbol could be Herod. The second symbol could be the attempt to crucify Christ. And the third could be some unknown plot that we don't even know of after Christ was risen again. Maybe Satan tried to do something then. Because it says Jesus was caught up. She gave birth to a child that he might devour it, but he was to rule the world with a rod of iron. What kind of child is this? It's a king. It's the king. And Satan tries to devour him, but what does he do? He's caught up to God and to his throne. The woman flees into the wilderness, into a place prepared by God, and we get this time, this 1,260 days, which, I'll be honest, I don't fully know what that means, but that appears to be that 3.5 years. That's why people often talk about the tribulation being 7 years. And they'll say that 3.5 of the years are bad, then the last 3.5 are even worse. I don't know myself. I do know this, that part of this prophecy has already been fulfilled, and part of it has not. How do I know that? Well, where is Jesus right now? He's at the right hand of God, so that part has already been fulfilled. And is the woman fully protected? No. So we're in that period now where we're looking towards that woman being protected. Where is Satan at now? Well, this passage will describe it further on. But is Satan truly barred from heaven right now? No. He go up there every day telling them me and you. He be like, that Brian dude, he did it again. And Jesus be like, I know, but I paid for it. Every day Satan is doing that. Doing that to you too. Like, you see that Julius do? I saw him. Jesus be like, I know. But I forgave. You see that Patty? Yeah. I saw him. But I forgave. I paid for her. I paid for him. I paid for her. Satan everywhere in heaven bad mouthing us. You know that? People have a wrong picture of heaven, how it is before we get to heaven. They have this idea that heaven is just full of these good angels and that's it. But the picture that's given in the Bible is a little bit more complicated than that. Think about the book of Job. Satan goes to heaven and meets with God. Think about the book of Kings, where God is talking and there's a court where there's like the holy angels over here and the bad angels over there. And he says, who's going to be a deceiving spirit? And one of the demons raises his hand, I'll do it. All the angels looking like, who would do something that's scummy? I will. Let him do it. He dirty already. We talk about unclean spirits. Paul talked about demonic forces in the heavenly places. We got to understand this. We don't fully understand the spiritual world and how it works. Anybody who goes out there and tells you they know absolutely how it works, they're lying. Because the Bible doesn't give us that kind of detail. We get some glimpses. When we get to heaven, that's going to be one of the first things I'm going to ask. How does it all work? And I'm not sure that God is necessarily going to answer. Because he didn't put the answers in him. And the reason I say that is because that's not what we really need to know. Oftentimes, we're searching for answers that we really don't need to know. God is looking at me and I'm asking like, man, how does heaven work? And he's like, I want you to just work on getting to work on time. Do you need to know this to do that? We oftentimes are looking beyond what we really need to be doing. But he reveals this to us so that we might know that there's spiritual things going on that are way above us. We are part of it though. And Satan is eventually, he's already in this war, but something about this war is going to get even worse. It talks about this dragon who had already swept down 1/3 of the stars. What does that symbolize? Well, Satan has 1/3 of the angels. And God has his 2/3. Michael and the dragon fight. The dragon loses. What does he do after he loses? He's thinking about killing the saints. But even when he thinks about killing the saints, the church, when they read this, I bet they're afraid. They're like, Satan is coming after us? But what does heaven say? Now the salvation and power and kingdom of our God and authority of his Christ have come. We have to understand this. Even in our persecution, God's will is still being done. God is in control. And that's what the people that this book was written to needed to hear. They didn't need to hear a lie to tell them that they were not going to be persecuted tomorrow, because that wasn't the truth. They didn't need to be told tomorrow will be better than today, because that may not necessarily be the case. I was just watching a sermon the other day by one of my favorite pastors, Joel Osteen. He was lying and saying how when you sit there and you do great obedience, that God will always reward you beyond your imagination. It's not always the case. That is not always the case. At least it's not on this world. Me and my dad was talking about it at a meeting. And he said, at this church, sometimes you have to serve and without things. And we like it that way. I know that seems strange, but you know you have to serve and you don't get thanked all the time? People will say things like, somebody don't recognize me for how great I am and this and that. I'm like, and who does? Who gets that? How many times somebody has come up to you and be like, hey, Mickey, you know what? Appreciate you waking up early and coming to church on time all the time. And you know that one time when I was arguing at you at choir practice and you were really patient with me, but I was being ignorant, I appreciate that too. Who does that? Rarely, right? Rarely. Who's like, hey, Mickey, you could have took that song, but you gave it to me. And I really didn't deserve it, but you would have been a better voice for that, but you gave it to me. So we could have more peace in the choir. Who does that? Nobody. Nobody. We don't appreciate. You don't get appreciated here. Let's just be honest. Even if you have Mother's Day, your kids are not going to turn around while you're changing their diaper and be like, you know what? Thank you for that. I really needed that. I would have caught a disease if that was stuck to me for any longer. They don't do that. You get a present once in a year and then they go back to being bad. And that's how the world is, right? People talk about Boss's Day. Nobody celebrates Boss's Day because you seem like a kisser. Nobody celebrates Employees Day because the boss seemed like a kisser. Nobody celebrates anybody the way that they really want to be celebrated. Who has had it where their birthday was one of the worst days they ever had? Because they anticipated that they would be appreciated that day, and guess what happened? It was another normal day. A little bit better than normal, but it never reaches to your expectation, does it? You ever had a kid that after Christmas they looking at you like, that's it? We can't give them everything they want. They thought they were going to be appreciated. You know, and as a parent, you want to say, you don't do nothing around here but cost you a bill. What? They don't want to hear that. People don't want to hear that. People are not appreciated. And they feel that they should be more appreciated. Everybody feels that. Everybody feels that they're doing something. People don't even see what I'm doing. Yes, that's true. That's what faithfulness is. You know what faithfulness is? Faithfulness is this chair that nobody noticed. But if you sit down on it, you want it to hold you up. And when you get back up, you don't thank it for holding you up. You just said it did what it was supposed to do. And if it's faithful, it'll be quiet and do its job the next time too. That's what faithfulness is. And every once in a while, somebody might dust off that chair. And that's the most thankfulness that chair gets. But it's faithful. That's the sign of faithfulness. When you are truly faithful, you'll be faithful enough to be forgotten. You know when people puff you up and encourage you? When they don't think you're going to be faithful. When you one of them people that's like trying to pull encouragement from people, yeah, you know, we feel like we are paying a tax to encourage you when you do that. You may not realize it. But you're like, oh, wasn't that a good song I just did? Yeah, brother. Right? That's how it is. You got to be faithful, regardless of how other people may respond to it. Because nobody cares about how much work you put in behind the scenes to to be faithful, except for God.
Amen.
Nobody cares except for God. Nobody want to hear about how long I studied. figure this stuff out. They just want to know if it's going to be any good when they hear it. I don't blame you, because that's how I feel when somebody's up here too, right? We just got to be faithful. Guess who will reward us? God on the final day.
That's right.
So stop looking for your reward here. You're not going to find it. Look for the reward at the throne of God. Amen.
Amen.